Hi, this is Shane Starr, and today I'm taking the Introverted Feeling decision of doing the video from my car because there's too much action happening where I usually do my videos, and so I thought for peace and quiet's sake I would do it here. Anyway, this is the fifth of 8 videos I am doing in a unique series where I am combining my passion for typology with my education and experience in philosophy, helping my viewers live their best life by targeting specific cognitive functions or information metabolism elements for improvement using philosophical masterpieces as roadmaps pointing us to self-actualization in these realms. And the method we're using, again, is to target actionable functions or elements. That is not the things you're great at. You're already good at those. You don't need my help or anyone else's help to get better. And I'm avoiding the polar function, the point of least resistance, or your trickster function in MBTI, because for the most part that's a hopeless case. Okay, maybe not as much as the other people doing these kinds of videos think, but still I think we can get the best bang for our buck, for lack of a better expression, by targeting the tertiary function, that is the mobilizing function in Socionics, or the mobilizing element, the inferior function, which is the suggestive element in Socionics, and the demon function, the 8th function, which is the role element in Socionics. These are the areas where we're okay in, and we are good enough to learn and do better and put in work and see improvement. The higher functions, we again don't really need the help usually, and the lower functions are going to be actually one of these, the suggestive, is equal to the polar in strength, but at least we value it, so there's hope there. So we're focusing on the right ones, I think. So today we're doing FI, Introverted Feeling, and this is perhaps the function I have the most interest in, maybe most curiosity about. What does it really mean? What's it more about? If I'm right in my own personal typing, this is the function where I think I'm more advanced than I really am in it. I think I'm good at it. I think, there's times I mistake it for maybe being higher than it really is. But then when I compare it to people who really do have this function in a high place, I know I'm not where they are. My method, as I've said before in the other videos, for doing this kind of work, it depends on a proper definition of the functions. The best way to do this, I think, is to take your most trusted sources. For me, I like to use the MBTI website itself, insofar as it discusses the functions. I like to use definitions by Dario Nardi in his studies. I like to use sociotype, and I also look at a combination of all of them with Google AI. It believe it or not, that works quite well in terms of summarizing it all. What I do is I take all of that and focus on the overlap and cut the rest out. That way what we're left with is a kernel of truth, something that most of us can agree upon. So in short, I think the best way to describe FI is your inner conscience, what most of us would understand as our inner conscience, and that in and of itself requires more unpacking and definition. But FI, it's called relations in some socionic circles. It focuses on understanding the quality, nature, and appropriate distance of personal relations. So I would also apply this personally. I would apply this to objects, things, and concepts as well, not just people, because I can have a real attachment to the colors black and white, for instance. I love how they look together. I love the contrast. I don't like a lot of patterns, but I like the bold contrast of black and white. You could say I have an affection for it. Is it a person? No. So if it's not a person, it can't be FI, right? No, that's where I argue it can be. What else is it? If I really like a particular thing and it's personal to me, not because it's cool or to make an impression or because I'm trying to do the opposite of that or anything. It's just when I'm around these colors, it makes pleasure happen for me. Okay, so I would add to personal relations objects, things, and some concepts. But in general, keeping with my strategy of cutting out the overlap, FI aspires to goodness of character. It does include attitudes of like or dislike, else I wouldn't have given you the little monologue I just did. And it includes personal values and integrity. Good FI is love, friendship, affection, goodness, compassion, desires, versus poor relations, antipathy, wickedness, cruelty, or the opposite of desire, indifference. Okay? Examples of people who struggle with this function, I'm thinking mostly ESTPs, some ENTPs too. Technically they're the same, but I find that ESTPs struggle with these things more. Struggles with authenticity, like knowing who you are and what you stand for, what you're really about. Knowing appropriate emotional expression and responses. And I would add low FI users all the way up to, third in your front stack for MBTI purposes. I think there can be a struggle with appropriate emotional expression and responses. And perhaps we're bordering on FE and Socionics, but for MBTI, this is FI for sure. I would say people with low FI are oftentimes out of touch with their values, difficulty in relating to others, even as well as oneself. I think a lot of times these struggles with values extends to oneself. What's your favorite color? What's your favorite team? What's your favorite movie? Can you rank these things? They have a hard time doing that. They don't really know. It's either contextual or it changes, or they just don't know, or they're stuck and they can't make a choice. Think of how polar TI looks with regards to logic. Polar FI looks like this with regards to values, ranking things in appropriate order, and even with your own ranking. So it's your own personal thing, so it should be easy, but for some people it's not. I think we find a disconnect between people's beliefs and their behavior. Again, I can't help but think of ESTPs in jail with their crucifixes and shrines to the Holy Mother and stuff, and here they are, murderers, rapists, robbers, all that stuff, but they're religious in another way, and it's just like something isn't matching here. You're such an extreme this way and that way, you can't have it both ways, but somehow a lot of times they do. Struggles with understanding who they really are. Again, what they stand for, their beliefs, their likes, their dislikes. I would extend this to friends. I'd say if you struggle with knowing who your friends are versus who your friends aren't, and you have a lot of what they call frenemies, people who you're familiar with, that you say hi to them, you know them by name, they're acquaintances, you don't know if you love them or hate them or kind of like them or kind of don't, or a little of both. If you're stuck on that seesaw, not knowing what's going on, you're probably low in FI and you probably could use some help. So let's jump to our author today. An author close to my heart. I've talked about doing my master's thesis on Martin Heidegger and his work Being in Time. I did my senior thesis before grad school on Soren Kierkegaard and his postscript to the Philosophical Fragments, and more on that later. But Kierkegaard, his dates are 1813 to 1855. He lived an unfortunately short life. He's known as the founder of existentialism. He's a Danish philosopher, theologian, and author, but it's weird to call him anything more than an author in some ways, because he resisted systematic thinking so much that you couldn't call him a theologian, because he'd never put together a system, and he critiqued systems most violently, in words as you can. He hated Hegel, for instance. Most of his writings mention Hegel in a derogatory way. He attacked inauthentic Christianity, and I think a lot of his attacks on Christianity deserve merit and attention, especially from Christians. His whole idea, the purpose of his whole thing was, in his words, to find an idea which is true for me, an idea for which I'm willing to live and die for. That sums Kierkegaard up in a nutshell. He's oftentimes grouped with Nietzsche, which, again, people who don't know philosophy, they think there's a contradiction there, because Kierkegaard was the Christian of the most profound sort, and Nietzsche is, of course, the one who famously proclaimed that God is dead. And they think, oh, those two couldn't be further opposite. It's illogical to put them together. And I would say no, they're two sides of the same coin. They both believe in the primacy and significance of an innermost passion and a desire for truth. What the truth actually is doesn't matter as much as one's passion and commitment to it. And I think there's some, believe it or not, I think there's some logical truth to that statement as well. Think about marriage, well, you're in love with this person, but technically speaking, this other person had more money, this other person's technically better looking. It's like, I understand that, but I love her. That I can't explain how, why, or what. My heart goes to this one, not the technically better one. That's the kind of feeling that we're trying to capture here with Kierkegaard and with FI. Something I'm going to do on a forthcoming video is compare and contrast with FI and TE. When should we choose one? When should we choose the other? Is there a formula perhaps that we could use? On things like this, I should choose FI. On these other matters, I should always go with what TE is telling me. I'm interested in pursuing that line of thought further, and I'm going to do that soon. But back to our point. Our introduction to the philosophical masterpiece that best captures the essence of the function we're trying to improve on is called Concluding Unscientific Postscript to the Philosophical Fragments. We oftentimes in philosophy just call it the Postscript to the Philosophical Fragments. But I think we do it a disservice because it is unscientific in a profound sense. This work argues that truth as we normally practice it is indeed subjective and only found in intense personal experience, not in objective systems. And I think to that end, you can know all the empirical facts about a person, where they were born, when they were born, down to the minute. You can know what color their hair is, how many hairs are on their head, their color of their eyes, their height, their weight, their blood pressure, the whole thing. And guess what? We don't know a damn thing about them, Everything that makes us human, everything important that makes us who we are and what we are, really in the deepest, most profound humanistic sense of the word, they're all outside of the scientific realm. Our passions, our hopes, our dreams, our fears, what we love, what we hate, what we want most, who we are, you know. Perhaps science can tell us what we are, but not who we are. And I think, again, to find the kind of truth that makes a difference in our lives, one always has to take that leap of faith. It requires a personal commitment. It doesn't necessarily have to be a blind leap. We can use logic to help guide our jump, and we can know what we're jumping from and have a decent idea what we're jumping to. But nonetheless, like in religious matters, I think believing in atheism takes as much, if not more, faith than believing in God. To believe that the universe started out from nothing and somehow mindlessly, blind, deaf, mute, and brainless managed to produce itself. To me, that's more miraculous than just assuming that there is an intelligence greater than our own that we cannot fully comprehend. So whatever way you go in life, not just with God, but marriage, career, choosing your college major, there's always a leap of faith involved. We can never have all the objective facts. And guess what? Even when we think we do have all the objective facts, we still have to take a leap. We have to choose. And hearkening back to Sartre in our SE video, you're never going to know if it was the right decision or not. If it turns out good, how do we know the other decision wouldn't have turned out even better? If it turns out bad, how do we know the other decision wouldn't have even been worse? You'll never know. You have to learn to live with that. So FI is not certitude in terms of empirical truth, but certitude in terms of intense personal passion and commitment. So our featured takeaway quote in this, and I was going to give a long quote. I already have it bookmarked and everything, but I think I'm going to paraphrase here. Kierkegaard says, truth indeed is subjectivity. And he says even our most renowned philosophers and scientists are guilty of putting their personal beliefs above objective proofs. People will do research and pretend that they arrived at their conclusions through the steps of inductive or deductive reasoning, when in fact they already knew what they wanted to prove and the reasons came after the fact. Nietzsche makes this exact same comment on culture. And we see that in today. Every study that you see about whatever it is, about sociology or climate change or ingredients in food, to know what the conclusion is, look who did the study and look who funded the study. Guaranteed, if you read something saying that eggs are the best, most underrated food, guess who funded that study that decided that? The egg industry, right? Political people take advantage of this. The masses who don't know any better just look at the news. Oh, wow, I never knew eggs are great for you, or bad for you, depending on, again, who's doing the funding. So I think there's a lot of truth to what Kierkegaard's saying, and it feels weird to be talking about objective proof when we're talking about the opposite, personal commitment and intense feeling. But there is something to be said for the notion that truth is subjectivity. We're not saying that it should be this way necessarily, or that you can't be wrong. I mean, no one was committed to their beliefs any more than people who are willing to, fly planes into buildings to prove it, right? And do we think they were correct or right in their actions or even their beliefs? No. But that's what makes it so scary. And Kierkegaard wrote about this when he said fear, in his book Fear and Trembling. He talks about God telling Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, and in the end, those of you who know the story, God tells him no, it was a test, but that's the I guess craziness that's required in order to have that certitude in a different way than logical certainty happens. So I think we have a good idea of what that sort of philosophical nature of subjectivity being truth and how that might relate to FI. So what are some new perspectives that this might bring to FI? I would say so many of us do not deeply consider our own beliefs and values, and I would say ask yourself, do I really feel this way, or did I learn this behavior on autopilot from my friends, family, or culture around me? I think perhaps more than any other function, we're actually defined by our introverted feeling. I've already called it our conscience. I think it's the closest thing to our soul that we can come up with. Look in the mirror, really look and ask yourself, who am I? What do I really stand for? And think about it. Here's some suggestions to your routine moving forward to really zero in on your FI and make it higher powered. I wrote these down, so forgive me for sort of reading it off. I would say use your emotions to identify what's important to you. Make a list of 5 things that you would devote your life to, something that you maybe would live or die for even. I would say next time you take a stand or make an actionable move on behalf of someone else, ask yourself, why are you doing this? What principle lies behind this duty that you're fulfilling when you do that? I think we should examine what's important to us. Make a list of the values you hold. Make a list of values you think are maybe overrated that you don't hold. Make a list of values that you don't hold that maybe other people hold. Doing these exercises will help you zero in more on who you really are. Get to know yourself better. I would say examine universal values. What would a utopia look like to you? What would a dystopia look like to you? Maintain integrity. Consider what it means for you to be in harmony with your deepest self. And again, I've already touched on this theme, but so many of us have values, but we don't really live in accordance with those values. I know for a long time I didn't live in accordance with mine, and I regret that, and I do not wish the same for anyone else. I would say this one's hard for me. When someone comes to you with a problem, try actively listening to them instead of just giving them a list of things to do to solve the problem. And to me, this sounds more like FE in a way than FI, but when we're thinking of values in interpersonal relationships, I think there is something to that, to try to listen and take in other people's values and compare and contrast them to your own. And if you can, crusade for something, find a cause that fits with your deepest values, and follow it. Shakespeare said in Hamlet, to thine own self be true. Try practicing that. Live for yourself and know who you are, and live accordingly. That's all I have for today. Tomorrow we'll be doing FE. That's going to be a challenge, but we'll have fun with it. That's it. Peace out.